I just noticed actually the faithfulness. This is quite a happy song, but the faithfulness in here, you can actually use it also an adjective, as a descriptive. God is faithful in his mercy. God is also faithful in his love. He is also faithful in punishment. He is faithful. His characteristic is faithfulness. And the story of Abraham actually describes that. The whole story, his life, is, if you have studied about narcissism or this kind of personality disorders, for example, some of us have narcissistic customs, for example. I know I do have. And some of them I'm quite proud of it because they are protective of my behaviors in a certain situation as a female pastor. So, but when you're talking about disorder of somebody, there has to be continuous proof of that behavioral pattern. Then it becomes a, disorder, something that it's characteristic. It's something that you are. It's in your being, basically, and it's harder than to deal with. That was kind of bad thing to pull it as an example into here, how God is faithful. God does faithful deeds to specific characters, but then you have to find a story where God is faithful from the beginning to the end with somebody, to understand that it's something who he is, that's in him, in his being, that characteristic. It's unmovable, unchanging, it's eternal when we're talking about God. And the story of Abraham is actually a story of God. How God relates just to somebody. Of course, when we look at it, we're looking Abraham is a great father of faith. But why is he a great father of faith? Because God chose him to be. It was God's choice to pick Abraham. It was God's decision to walk with Abraham from the beginning, when he called him from his father's house, to the end. God chose Abraham. And Abraham is not perfect. We tend to think about the heroes of the Bible being perfect, like superheroes, like Superman, because Superman is the perfection of all the superheroes. He wasn't human that was bit by a spider, or got with gamma rays changed into a Hulk. Superman was just that. In his being, he was a perfect superhero. Thus, we sometimes can't relate to him because he is like the embodiment of perfection. He's righteous in his behaviors and all that. So we tend to look at our human heroes the same way like we look to Superman. And sometimes, unfortunately, we look at God the same way. But God is something utterly different. He is not a superhero. He is not human. We can't think about how we reflect our kings and rulers and everything and then look at through those glasses to God. Thus, we can be thankful that God has shown in practice who he is. What is his inner being? And in the story of Abraham, he does that, especially the faithfulness part. He calls Abraham from his father's house. Abraham knew already about God. They already had a relationship. He didn't go onto somebody's door, God, and say, follow me. Because Abraham's father already had left their previous home, took the family towards Canaan. The family was already moving on the footsteps of God's chosen path. God doesn't necessarily go and pull you out of the blue to somebody who wouldn't know anything about God. He knows everybody. He knows what to do and who to pull. And especially when you think about what was his task, Abraham's task, to be the father of this exemplary, this big, wonderful nation that will be the Superman of the people, you know, basically to show God's mercy, be the God's feet and the hands, to showing mercy to the nations among they're going to live in. That was the task. It failed. That's because we are not Superman. So, but God is faithful in his mercy. God goes and calls Abraham. Abraham says yes, takes his family, takes Lot with him. It's a very interesting thing why he takes Lot with him, because when God called him, he gave a promise. God gave God's promise to Abraham. And the promise was that you're going to be the father of the great nation. I think quite many of you want to be the godfather of great family that functions perfectly and everything. It would be very good, you know. It's the human desire sometimes. So I think he liked the idea. Father of the great nation. And we know when we look back that he became a father of the great nation. We even as Adventists think him as a great father for us, as an example. We treat him as such. So he became that. But it's very interesting the reason why he takes actually Lot with him. He is not that young when he goes. And he takes Lot, his nephew. It seems that actually he had adopted Lot to be his son. There was already a problem that actually Genesis repeatedly has in the stories, that you can't have children without God. The future cannot be fulfilled if God is not there helping you and fulfilling it, no matter what you do. So it seems that Lot was like an adopted son. So throughout his journey, Abraham is walking to Canaan, to the land of the promise, to become the father of the faithful. And he is trying the whole time to fulfill the promise that God gave to him. He's trying to do that. But God repeatedly has to come back to him. No, this is not the way I'm going to fulfill my promise. That's not the way. I'm not going to fulfill it through Lot. I will be with Lot, as you can see that he saved Lot from the town because Abraham begged. He will be there, but Lot is not the key to fulfilling God's promise. Neither was the servant of Abraham that he tried to adopt later as his son. Neither was Ishmael. By the way, homework for all of you. Go and read the 2 stories of Hagar in the Bible when she leaves with Ishmael to the wilderness, how God treats with her. They are one of the most beautiful passages of how God is there for you. And if you, the first time, you forgot that, he will be there second time. He is not leaving you. It's one of the most beautiful stories. Ishmael wasn't the son. And eventually we are in the situation that how is the promise going to be fulfilled? So God is saying, I'm here. It's my promise, I fulfill it. So he did. He is faithful. I don't know actually if the fulfillment of the promise would have happened earlier if Abraham would have let him to do that. Abraham was like a little bit on the way. He tried to control the situation. He tried to help God. And God is continually saying, no, no, no. He kind of restates the promise again and again and again. Eventually, in the end, he says, you know, I will fulfill the promise from your bloodline and Sarah's bloodline. And remember what happened to Sarah also twice? Danger, danger. Being sent to foreign courts because Abraham wanted to hide the fact that they were husband and wife. So God had to step in and say, sorry, I'm going to punish you if you take her and everything. And, you know, like there's been dangers all the time because Abraham is trying to control the situation. But every single time God is there because he made the promise, he's going to fulfill it. And because he's faithful in his love and mercy, he's actually quite kind in the way that he's dealing with these situations. He's actually extremely kind. Then in the end, the moment that we realize that he is actually, Abraham is the father, not the perfect father, but in God's eyes, he's righteous, is the last one when he's supposed to sacrifice Isaac. Now he knows that this is the son that is going to be part of the promise, the fulfillment. God has shown it, like hammering it into his head. And God comes, sacrifice your son. That story we usually read as a painting of how Jesus is going to be our lamb. It is that. It's a story of how God the Father loves us. It's that too. How greatly he is able to give his son for us. Yes. But when you look at the full story, it is the story how God is faithful of fulfilling his promise to us. And how Abraham understands it in the end of his life. It's like the fulfillment of their relationship throughout. He is, when he gets the request from God, he gets up, he gets it during the night, he gets up in the morning, he knows where to go. And it seems that there's not enough good wood to be burned, so he cuts down wood and takes it with him for 3 days' journey. So Abraham prepares. He knows what he's supposed to do. He knows where he's going, where he's supposed to do it, and what he needs to fulfill the request of God. Now he has to be faithful to God. That's why he's righteous. He has learned to have the same characteristic than God. He has the same faithfulness towards God. That's why he's righteous. You know, 3 days, nights and days, he has to go through with the most horrendous thing. And he's utterly sure that he will do that. We have a great example, actually, when you read the Bible, that how Paul in the New Testament, in the Hebrews, when he talks about this, is using interpretation of the text of the Old Testament. That you have that. This is one of the best examples if you want to teach it to somebody. How Paul takes this, that the stuff that happens in the Old Testament, interprets and explains it in the New Testament. It's an excellent example of that. And he explains, because the story itself, it's very practical. It doesn't give the emotions. It's just step by step what happens. Abraham says to the servants that we will go and we will come back. So there is something in that one that he's saying that the boy is coming back too, that he's not staying there. So there is some type of, in the story, in the text, that he believes that his son will be alive when he comes back. So Paul is building on this and explaining that he had the faith to God and God's promise that he will give back his son after he's killed his son. You know, that there is this, that he will get back Isaac, that he had faith in it. Of course, God didn't want him to go through the horrible deed itself. So God solved it beforehand, because it was obvious that Abraham learned to be faithful to God. So it's actually, the full story is a story of how you learn to become in who you are, in your characteristics, in your behaviors, like God. The ultimate step-by-step learning, travel, the journey in the relationship of those two, God and Abraham. How you, in your choices, start imitating him.